A girl hiding under a table discovered her stepfather was paying fake debts to scammers targeting families. Her father's old friends kept a 23-year promise to protect her, exposing a fraud scheme that saved dozens of homes. Like for Justice Stories, subscribe for more, and comment your location. The rain hammered against the cracked asphalt of Central Avenue as Emily's sneakers splashed through puddles that reflected the neon glow of the corner mart. Her breath came in sharp gasps, each exhale forming small clouds in the cool Albuquerque evening, the scent of wet earth mixed with the distant aroma of green chile from a nearby restaurant. But Emily couldn't focus on anything except the burning in her lungs and the echo of her stepfather's voice still ringing in her ears. "You're nothing but trouble, just like your father was." The words cut deeper than any physical blow could have. She'd seen the men in expensive suits shuffling papers in their living room, their voices low and urgent as they spoke about property transfers and legal documents that looked nothing like the official papers her mother had shown her years ago. When Emily had asked questions, her stepfather's face had turned that familiar shade of red that meant silence was her only option. The bell above the door of Delgado's Coffee chimed as she pushed inside, the warm air hitting her damp face like a gentle embrace. The small cafe was nearly empty, except for an elderly woman reading a newspaper in the corner, and a man behind the counter with graying temples and calloused hands that spoke of work beyond brewing coffee. Marcus Delgado looked up from wiping down the espresso machine, his dark eyes taking in the shivering 13-year-old girl who'd just stumbled into his sanctuary. He'd seen that look before, the wild desperation of someone running from something they couldn't name or escape. Emily's gaze darted around the cafe, noting the mismatched chairs, the faded photographs of Old Town on the walls, and the small table in the far corner that sat low enough for her to slip underneath. Without hesitation, she dropped to her knees and crawled beneath it, pulling her backpack against her chest like armor. The cool tiles pressed against her palms as she tried to steady her breathing. Through the table legs, she could see Marcus's worn boots approaching slowly, deliberately, the way someone moves when they don't want to startle a wounded animal. "You okay under there, Misha?" His voice carried the warmth of someone who understood hiding places. Emily's throat felt raw. I need a minute." Marcus crouched down, his knees creaking slightly. "Take all the time you need. Want some hot chocolate?" She nodded, not trusting her voice, as Marcus stood and moved toward the counter. Something small and metallic caught the light as it fell from his shirt pocket, spinning once before settling near Emily's hand. She picked it up, a small button with 47A, etched into tarnished metal. The numbers barely visible from years of handling. The button felt warm in her palm, as if it carried secrets of its own. Emily had seen enough movies to know that numbers like these usually meant something important, something people didn't talk about in polite conversation. But there was something else about the way Marcus had immediately tensed when he noticed it was missing, the way his hand instinctively went to his pocket before his eyes found hers beneath the table. Outside, the rain continued its relentless rhythm against the windows. Mrs. Hernandez, the elderly woman with the newspaper, glanced toward the table where Emily was hiding, then at Marcus, who was carefully preparing hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. She'd lived in this neighborhood long enough to recognize the signs. Another kid running from something that shouldn't happen in any decent home. Marcus's phone buzzed against the counter. The name Rick, stepfather, flashed across the screen before he declined the call. Then another buzz. A text message. "Emily's being dramatic. She'll come home when she gets hungry. Kids these days. You know how it is." But Marcus didn't know how it was. He knew how it had been for him. Years ago, when hiding under tables and behind dumpsters was the difference between surviving another day and becoming another statistic, he knew the weight of secrets and the way they could crush a person from the inside out if they weren't shared with the right people. He set the hot chocolate on the floor near Emily's hiding spot, close enough for her to reach but far enough away to give her space. The marshmallows bobbed on the surface like tiny life preservers in a brown sea. "That button," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible above the coffee grinder. "What does it mean?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hand unconsciously moving to where the button used to rest in his pocket. "It means someone who made promises a long time ago, someone who's trying to keep them." Through the cafe window, the streetlights illuminated figures huddled under bus stop covers, waiting for shelter from more than just the rain. The neighborhood held its breath, the way it always did when change was coming, when old debts were about to be called in, and when a 13-year-old girl's courage to run would set in motion events that would reshape more lives than anyone could imagine. Chapter 2. Marcus stared at the 47A button in Emily's small palm, and 23 years collapsed into a single heartbeat. The fated metal transported him instantly to a cramped apartment where 4 young men had sworn an oath that seemed impossible to keep. Until tonight. "Where did your father work, Mija?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair across from Emily's table. "He was a mechanic. Mom said he fixed cars for people who couldn't afford the fancy shops." Emily's voice was stronger now, warmed by hot chocolate and the unexpected safety of being truly seen. "He died when I was 7. Car accident on I-40 during a snowstorm." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Diego Vasquez, 47A, the man who'd pulled him out of a burning car when Marcus was 19 and stupid enough to think he was invincible. Diego, who'd made them all promise that if anything ever happened to him, they'd watch over his little girl with the bright eyes and the laugh that could light up a room. "Your father," Marcus said carefully. "He ever mention having friends? Guys he worked with before the auto shop?" Emily shrugged, but her attention sharpened. "Mom doesn't like talking about that time. She says it's better to focus on the future." The cafe's atmosphere shifted as other customers began to notice the intensity of their conversation. Mrs. Hernandez folded her newspaper with deliberate slowness, clearly eavesdropping. 2 college students at the counter whispered behind their hands, shooting glances toward the corner table where a grown man was talking to a girl hiding underneath it. Marcus's phone buzzed again. 3 missed calls from Rick, Emily's stepfather. The last text was more aggressive. "I know she's somewhere on Central when I find her. There's going to be consequences. Tell her that." "Emily, what happened at home tonight?" Marcus kept his voice level, professional. "You don't have to tell me everything, but I need to know if you're safe." She emerged slowly from under the table, brushing dust from her jeans. "Rick had these men over. They were signing papers about our house, but the papers looked wrong. When I asked my mom about it, she told me to go to my room. But I heard them talking about transferring the deed, about how my dad left debts that needed to be settled." Marcus felt his jaw clench. He'd seen this before. Vultures circling families who didn't understand the legal system, who could be intimidated into signing away their rights. Rick got really angry when I kept asking questions. He said I was just like my father, too curious for my own good. Then he said something about how my father's friends were all dead or in prison anyway. So nobody was coming to save me. The button seemed to grow heavier in Emily's hand. "But that's not true, is it?" Marcus reached for his phone, not to answer Rick's calls, but to scroll through a contacts list he hadn't touched in 2 years. 3 names that represented the only real family he'd ever known. Alicia Santos, social worker in Phoenix; Jonah Martinez, community outreach coordinator in Santa Fe; Tobias Toby Chen, art teacher in Las Cruces. "Emily, I'm going to make some calls. People who knew your father. People who made him a promise a long time ago." "What kind of promise?" Marcus looked at the button in her hand, then at her face. So much like Diego's, it was almost painful. "The kind you don't break, no matter how much time passes." Outside, the rain had softened to a gentle mist, but the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Mrs. Hernandez approached the counter, ordering another coffee she clearly didn't need, positioning herself to overhear whatever came next. Marcus dialed the first number. "Alicia, it's Marcus from 47A. A pause. I need you to come to Albuquerque. Diego's daughter is in trouble." The silence on the other end stretched for 5 heartbeats before Alicia's voice came back, changed, focused. "How bad?" "The kind that requires all of us. I'll be there tomorrow morning." 2 more calls. 2 more voices from the past, each responding with the same immediate understanding that some obligations transcend time and distance. Emily watched Marcus's face transform as he made each call, the careful mask of the cafe owner falling away to reveal something harder, more determined underneath. "Who are these people?" she asked. "Your father's brothers, not by blood, but by choice. We called ourselves 47A, because that was the number of the apartment where we learned what family really meant." The cafe's front door chimed as 2 new customers entered, but they didn't order anything. They sat at the table closest to the window, their eyes never quite leaving Emily and Marcus. One of them spoke quietly into a phone, his words indistinct, but his intention clear. Marcus noticed them immediately, his posture shifting subtly. "Emily, there's a back door through the kitchen. Why don't you help me close up for the night?" She followed him behind the counter, the button still clutched in her fist. "Are we in trouble?" "No, Mija, but trouble might be looking for us, and when it finds us, we're going to be ready." Chapter 3. Dawn broke gray and uncertain over Albuquerque's east side, the Sandia Mountains barely visible through morning haze. Marcus had spent the night in the cafe, sleeping fitfully in the office chair while Emily dozed on the small couch in the back room, wrapped in the spare blanket he kept for winter emergencies. The first to arrive was Alicia Santos. Driving a dust-covered Honda Civic that had seen too many miles on New Mexico highways, she parked across the street at 6:47 a.m., sitting in her car for several minutes, studying the neighborhood with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to assess environments for hidden dangers. Marcus watched her through the window, noting how little she'd changed, still small and fierce, still moving with the careful economy of someone who'd fought for every opportunity she'd ever received. Her social worker's badge caught the morning light as she finally stepped out of the car, straightening her professional blazer over jeans that had been practical choices for a long, unexpected drive. 23 years, she said, as Marcus opened the door for her. You look old. You look tired. Marcus's smile was the first genuine one Emily had seen from him. She's in the back room. Alicia's entire demeanor shifted the moment she saw Emily, her professional instincts kicking in. She crouched down to Emily's eye level, noting the girl's defensive posture, the way her hand instinctively went to her pocket where the 47A button rested. Your father used to carry pictures of you in his wallet, Alicia said softly. Even when you were just a baby, he'd show them to anyone who'd look. Emily's carefully constructed walls cracked slightly. You really knew him. He taught me how to change a tire when I was 17. Said every woman should know how to take care of herself, because depending on other people for basic survival was just another kind of prison. At 7:15, Jonah Martinez arrived in a pickup truck that somehow looked both well-maintained and thoroughly used. He was broader than Emily had expected, with carpenter's hands and the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned to build things instead of tearing them down. A rosary hung from his rearview mirror, and Emily could see boxes of school supplies in the truck bed. Still can't park straight, Marcus observed as Jonah climbed out of the slightly crooked vehicle. Still can't make coffee that doesn't taste like motor oil, Jonah replied. But his embrace with Marcus lasted longer than most handshakes, the kind of contact between people who'd survived something together. Toby Chen was the last to arrive, pulling up in a small SUV decorated with paint splatters that spoke of art classes and community murals. He moved with nervous energy, his artist's eyes immediately cataloging details, the way Emily held herself. The protective circle Marcus and Alicia had unconsciously formed around her, the two men in the car across the street who were pretending not to watch them. So, Toby said, accepting coffee from Marcus and grimacing slightly at the taste. Someone wants to explain why we're having a 47A reunion in a coffee shop instead of prison or the morgatory. Because Diego kept his end of the deal, Marcus said simply, and now it's time for us to keep ours. Emily found herself studying each of them, looking for traces of the dangerous past Marcus had hinted at, but all she saw were adults who looked like they belonged in the everyday world. A social worker, a handyman, a teacher, a cafe owner, people who'd somehow transcended whatever they'd been before. Alicia pulled out a small notebook, her social worker's training evident in her systematic approach. Tell us everything, Micha. Start from the beginning, as Emily recounted the previous night's events. The men across the street were joined by a third person, a woman in expensive clothing who clearly didn't belong in this neighborhood. She spoke into her phone with sharp gestures, her attention focused on the cafe. We're drawing attention, Jonah observed quietly. Good, Marcus replied. Let them watch. Let them wonder what four people who supposedly don't exist anymore are doing with Diego's daughter. Mrs. Hernandez appeared at the cafe door, carrying a casserole dish covered with aluminum foil. For the girl, she announced, then leaned closer to Marcus. My grandson works at City Hall. Says there's been a lot of paperwork moving through the property office lately. Transfers that don't make sense. Signatures that look questionable. She glanced meaningfully at the watchers across the street. Some people in the neighborhood are asking questions. Quietly, but asking. Toby was sketching in the margins of a napkin. His artist's habit of documenting through images. How many families are we talking about? Hard to say, Mrs. Hernandez replied. But the Gutierrez house went up for sale last month after they'd lived there for 15 years. The Morales family suddenly moved to an apartment across town. Both families had teenage daughters. Emily felt something cold settle in her stomach. They're targeting families with kids. Alicia's phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor. Where are you? The Ramirez case needs attention, she typed back. Family emergency, we'll be back tomorrow. For Alicia, tomorrow was already too far away. She'd spent 15 years helping kids navigate systems designed to chew them up, and she recognized the signs of something larger and more organized than a simple property dispute. "We need to see your house," she told Emily. "We need to understand what we're really dealing with." Marcus locked the cafe door behind them, flipping the sign to closed. As they walked toward Emily's neighborhood, the watchers across the street started their engines, maintaining a careful distance, but making no attempt to hide their presence. "Let them follow," Jonah said, adjusting the toolbox in his truck bed. "Sometimes the best way to draw out a predator is to act like prey." Emily looked back at the 4 adults walking with her, people who'd dropped their entire lives to honor a promise to a man who'd been dead for 6 years. For the first time since running through the rain the night before, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. Chapter 4. Emily's house sat on a quiet street lined with mature cottonwood trees, their leaves whispering secrets in the morning breeze. From the outside, it looked like every other working-class home in the neighborhood. Small front yard, chain-link fence, a driveway just wide enough for 1 car. But as they approached, the subtle wrongness became apparent. "The mailbox is new," Emily observed, pointing to the pristine black post that contrasted sharply with the weathered ones on either side. "We've lived here since I was 8. That mailbox was blue until last month." Alicia noted how Emily said "we" instead of "I," the way kids did when they were trying to hold on to stability, even as it crumbled around them. As they reached the front porch, she could see fresh scratches around the doorknob, the kind left by keys that didn't quite fit anymore. Marcus examined the lock with the practiced eye of someone who'd once needed to know such things. "This has been changed recently. Professional job, but rushed." Through the front window, they could see Emily's stepfather Rick pacing in the living room, phone pressed to his ear, his voice carried through the thin walls. Sharp with frustration, when he noticed them watching, he moved deeper into the house, but not before they caught fragments of his conversation. "Supposed to be simple, and kids causing problems. He's not supposed to be home," Emily whispered. "He works construction, leaves at 6 every morning." Jonah checked his phone for the time, 9:23 a.m. on a Tuesday. Construction doesn't stop for family drama. The front door opened before they could knock. Rick emerged, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was a compact man in his 40s, with the kind of muscles that came from physical labor, and the kind of eyes that missed nothing. "Emily, baby. There you are. Your mom's been worried sick." His gaze swept over the 4 adults flanking her, lingering on Marcus. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Rick Delgado." "Delgado?" Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. "No relation, I'm sure. Common name around here." Rick's laugh sounded rehearsed. "Emily, why don't you come inside? Your new friends can wait on the porch." "Actually," Alicia stepped forward, pulling her social services badge from her jacket, "we'd like to come in. I'm following up on some concerns about Emily's well-being." Rick's composure slipped for just a moment, long enough for Emily to see something that made her step closer to Marcus. "What kind of concerns?" "Emily's fine. Kids her age, they're dramatic, make mountains out of molehills." "May we come in?" Alicia's voice carried the authority of someone who'd dealt with resistant guardians before. The living room felt smaller with 5 adults in it, the air heavy with tension, and the lingering smell of cigarettes that hadn't been there when Emily left the night before. Papers were scattered across the coffee table, official-looking documents with multiple signatures and notary seals that caught Toby's artistic eye. "Spring cleaning," Rick explained, gathering the papers quickly. "You know how it is. Taxes coming up." But Jonah had already noted the letterhead on one document, Southwestern Property Solutions, with an address in a part of town known more for check-cashing stores than legitimate businesses. Emily's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop asking questions. Some secrets are better left buried." She showed the message to Marcus without Rick noticing. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the kind of micro-expression Emily was learning to read in adults who'd lived through harder times than they talked about. "Where's Emily's mother?" Alicia asked, settling into the worn armchair with the casual authority of someone who planned to stay, work. "She's got a double shift at the hospital. Respiratory therapist. Very dedicated." Rick's answers came too quickly, too smoothly. "She'll be sorry she missed you." Toby had been quietly studying the room, noting details that others might miss. The family photos on the mantelpiece were older, none recent. The carpet showed wear patterns that suggested furniture had been moved recently. Most telling were the small holes in the drywall where pictures used to hang, family memories that had been systematically removed. "Emily," Alicia said, "could you show me your room? I'd like to see where you do your homework." As they climbed the narrow stairs, Emily whispered, "Mom's not working a double. She's visiting her sister in Las Cruces. She doesn't know about any of this. Emily's room told a different story than the sanitized living room below. Here were the traces of a normal 13-year-old's life, school books stacked on a desk, posters of bands Emily was probably too young to understand, clothes that needed washing scattered across the floor. But there were also signs of search and invasion. Dresser drawers hadn't been closed completely. Her jewelry box, a cheap plastic thing that played Fur-Elise when opened, sat at a different angle on her nightstand. "Someone's been through your things," Alicia observed. Emily opened her closet and pulled out a shoebox from behind her winter coats. Inside were her father's belongings, a watch that had stopped working years ago, a photo of him in mechanic's coveralls, and a letter addressed to her that she'd never had the courage to open. "Rick doesn't know about this," she said. "Nobody does." The letter was in her father's handwriting, slightly faded but still legible. "For Emily, if something happens to me, to be opened when she's old enough to understand that some promises are more important than being safe." Alicia looked at the letter, then at Emily. "How old do you feel right now?" "Old enough," Emily replied, and meant it. Downstairs, they could hear Rick's voice growing sharper as he spoke to Marcus and Jonah. Something about property values and neighborhood changes, and how some people needed to mind their own business. Emily slid her father's letter into her pocket next to the 47A button. 2 pieces of a puzzle she was finally old enough to solve. Chapter 5. The letter felt like fire in Emily's pocket as they descended the stairs to find Rick standing too close to Marcus. His voice carrying the edge of a man whose carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. "I don't appreciate strangers coming into my home and asking questions," Rick was saying. "Emily's been through enough trauma with her father's death. The last thing she needs is people filling her head with stories about the past." "What kind of stories?" Jonah asked innocently, but his carpenter's hands rested easily at his sides in a way that suggested he was ready for whatever came next. Before Rick could answer, Emily's phone rang. Her mother's name flashed across the screen, and Rick's face went pale. "Don't answer that," he said quickly. "She's working. You don't want to disturb her during surgery." But Emily had already pressed the green button. "Mom." "Emily, sweetie. I've been trying to reach Rick all morning. Aunt Maria had a fall, so I'm staying another day. Is everything okay at home?" Emily looked at Rick, whose expression had shifted from false concern to barely concealed panic. "Actually, Mom, some people are here who knew Dad. They want to make sure I'm okay." The silence on the other end stretched for several beats before Emily's mother spoke again, her voice careful. "What people, baby?" "Friends of Dad's, from before." Another pause. "Emily, put one of them on the phone." Emily handed the phone to Alicia, who moved to the far side of the room for privacy. The conversation was brief, but intense, with Alicia asking pointed questions about property documents and guardianship papers, while Rick's complexion grew increasingly ashen. "Your wife will be home in 3 hours," Alicia announced, ending the call. "She's very interested in seeing these tax documents you mentioned." Rick's laugh came out strangled. "Look, there might have been some misunderstandings. Paperwork gets complicated when you're trying to protect a kid's inheritance." "Protect it from what?" Toby asked, his artist's eye catching the way Rick's hands were trembling slightly. Emily pulled out her father's letter, the paper crackling slightly as she unfolded it. Her father's handwriting was smaller than she remembered, cramped as if he'd been trying to fit too many words into too small a space. "Emily, if you're reading this, something has happened to me and the people I trust most aren't around to help, but they will come back. Look for the ones who carry 47A. They made a promise, and they keep their promises." She looked up to find all 4 adults watching her intently. Rick had gone completely still, his face a mask that couldn't quite hide the calculation going on behind his eyes. "Your stepfather seems like a good man, but good men can be fooled. If anyone tries to take the house, if anyone tries to make your mother sign papers she doesn't understand, if anyone makes you feel unsafe, find Marcus Delgado at the coffee shop on Central. Show him this letter and tell him Diego's debt needs to be paid." Emily's voice was steady as she read aloud, but her hands shook slightly as she reached the final paragraph. "The house is yours, mija. Not because of papers or laws, but because your father bled for every payment, and your mother cried over every sacrifice. Don't let anyone convince you that love is less powerful than lawyers. 47A never forgets, and neither should you." The silence that followed was broken by Rick's forced laugh. "Your father always had a flair for the dramatic, but legal documents are more complicated than letters written by men who were..." "Who were what?" Marcus's voice carried 23 years of barely controlled anger. Rick seemed to realize he'd said too much. I just meant that people change. Circumstances change. Emily's mother married me to give Emily stability, a future. Sometimes the past needs to stay buried. A car door slammed outside, followed by hurried footsteps on the front porch. Through the window, they could see a woman in an expensive suit arguing with someone on her phone, her gestures sharp with frustration. Mrs. Delgado. The woman knocked sharply on the door. We need to discuss the timeline for the property transfer. Rick's face had gone gray. She's not supposed to be here until tomorrow. Alicia moved to the window, her social worker's training allowing her to process the scene with professional detachment. Emily, have you seen this woman before? She was here last week. She brought papers for Mom to sign, but Mom said she needed more time to read them. Emily's voice was small but clear. Rick got really angry after she left. He said we were running out of time. The woman outside tried the doorknob and found it unlocked. She entered without invitation, stopping short when she saw the room full of people she clearly hadn't expected. Mr. Delgado, we had an appointment. Her eyes swept over the group, lingering on the letter in Emily's hands. I see you have guests. Ms. Rodriguez. Rick's voice was strained. There's been a misunderstanding. My stepdaughter has been spreading some stories. What kind of stories? Jonah asked, settling more comfortably into his chair with the easy confidence of someone who had nowhere else to be. Mrs. Rodriguez clutched her briefcase tighter. This is a private matter between family members. I'm family, Emily said quietly, and something in her tone made all the adults in the room look at her more carefully. This is my house. These are my father's friends, and I want to know what's in those papers you keep bringing here. For the first time since entering the house, Mrs. Rodriguez looked uncertain. She glanced at Rick, who was staring at the floor as if it might open up and swallow him, then at the four adults who were watching her with the focused attention of people who'd learned to recognize predators. Perhaps, she said carefully, we should reschedule for when Mrs. Delgado returns. Perhaps, Alicia replied, her badge still visible on her jacket. You should explain exactly what kind of business you're in and why you're pressuring a single mother to sign property documents while her daughter is out of the house. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the Sandia Mountains, and Emily felt the weight of her father's letter in her hand, like a promise that was finally ready to be kept. Chapter 6. Mrs. Rodriguez's briefcase clicked open with the sharp precision of someone accustomed to intimidation, but her usual confidence seemed shaken by the unexpected audience. She spread documents across the coffee table with the mechanical efficiency of a person going through familiar motions, though her hands betrayed slight tremors. These are standard property consolidation papers, she explained, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who delivered this speech many times before. The Delgado family has outstanding debts that predate the marriage, debts that, unfortunately, passed to surviving family members. Emily studied the papers, noting her father's name typed at the top of several forms, alongside figures that made her stomach clench. My dad never borrowed money. He paid cash for everything, because he said debt was just another word for slavery. Your father was, Ms. Rodriguez chose her words carefully, glancing at Marcus, involved in activities that created financial obligations. Those obligations didn't die with him. Marcus leaned forward, and Emily noticed how his presence seemed to fill more space than his actual size warranted. What kind of activities? The kind that required certain insurance policies, protection fees, arrangements that ensured his family would be safe as long as payments were maintained. The room went very still. Through the window, Emily could see Mrs. Hernandez from next door watering plants that didn't need watering. Her attention focused on the expensive car parked in front of Emily's house. You're saying someone has been collecting money in my father's name for 6 years? Emily's voice was steady, but Alicia could see the way her hands clenched in her lap. I'm saying that your stepfather has been very responsible about maintaining these arrangements, but circumstances have changed, and a lump sum settlement would be in everyone's best interest. Rick finally looked up from the floor, his face a map of defeat and fear. Emily, you have to understand. When your mother and I got married, these people approached me. They said your father owed money, that the interest kept growing. They said, as long as I paid monthly installments, you and your mother would be safe. What people? Jonah asked, but his tone suggested he already knew. People who don't give names, people who know where you work, where your kids go to school, what time you come home every night. Rick's voice cracked slightly. I've been paying them for 5 years, $1,500 a month that we couldn't afford, money that should have gone to Emily's college fund, or your mother's medical bills, Or fixing the roof that leaks every winter. Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. Is that why Mom works double shifts, because you've been paying money to people Dad didn't even owe? Your father was a good man, Ms. Rodriguez interjected smoothly. But good men sometimes make poor choices. The organization he associated with before his death had certain expectations. What organization? Marcus's voice cut through her practiced explanation like a blade. Ms. Rodriguez's composure slipped entirely. I think we should wait for Mrs. Delgado to return. No. Emily stood up, her father's letter still clutched in one hand. I want to know right now, what organization? The silence stretched until Toby spoke up, his artist's eye having caught something the others missed. The letterhead on those documents, Southwestern Property Solutions, that's not a collection agency. He'd been sketching absently during the conversation, his artist's habit of documenting details through images. Now he turned his notebook toward the others, showing a detailed rendering of the business card Miss Rodriguez had placed on the table. That address is in the same building as 3 other companies: Desert Investment Group, Cactus Holdings LC, and Familia Property Management, all registered to the same person. He paused, studying Miss Rodriguez's increasingly pale face. A person who's been buying up properties in working-class neighborhoods and flipping them to developers. You're running a scam, Alicia said, her social worker's training recognizing the pattern. You target families with deceased breadwinners, claim inherited debts that don't exist, and pressure them into signing over property that's worth far more than any fictional debt. Emily's phone buzzed with another anonymous text. Some conversations should happen in private. Send your friends away. She showed the message to Marcus, who immediately moved to the window. The watchers from the morning had been joined by a second car, both vehicles positioned to block easy exit from the street. How many families? Emily asked Miss Rodriguez directly. How many people have you done this to? Miss Rodriguez snapped her briefcase shut. This conversation is over. Mrs. Delgado will receive notice of the accelerated payment schedule. She has 72 hours to comply or face legal action. What legal action? Marcus stood as well, and Emily noticed how his movement seemed to prompt both Jonah and Toby to adjust their positions subtly, creating a barrier between Mrs. Rodriguez and the door. Foreclosure proceedings, garnishment of wages, investigation into potential tax evasion related to undeclared inheritance. Miss Rodriguez's voice had regained some of its professional chill. Your friend's daughter will find herself in foster care while her mother faces federal charges. Emily felt the floor shift beneath her feet. In her pocket, her father's letter and the 47A button seemed to grow heavier, 2 pieces of a puzzle that was finally beginning to make sense. My friends, she said quietly, looking at Marcus, Alicia, Jonah, and Toby. They're going to help me fight this, aren't they? Every step of the way, Alicia replied, and her badge caught the afternoon light streaming through the window. Miss Rodriguez paused at the door, her hand on the knob. You have no idea what you're interfering with. This is bigger than one house, bigger than one family. You should walk away while you still can. After she left, the 5 of them stood in Emily's living room listening to the sound of expensive engines starting outside. Rick slumped into his chair, his face buried in his hands. I'm sorry, he whispered. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I just paid them, they'd leave us alone. Emily looked at her stepfather, really looked at him, and saw a man who'd been drowning for 5 years, trying to save a family that wasn't even his by birth, but had become his by choice. We're going to fix this, she said, and meant it. All of us. Together. Through the window, storm clouds continued building over the mountains, but Emily no longer felt like she was facing them alone. Chapter 7. Emily's kitchen table became a war room by evening, covered with documents, notebooks, and Toby's increasingly detailed sketches of connections between seemingly unrelated businesses. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across papers that told a story of systematic exploitation spanning multiple neighborhoods and dozens of families. 17 families in the past 2 years, Alicia reported, her laptop open to property records she'd accessed through her social services database. All single mothers or elderly homeowners, all claiming inherited debts from deceased family members. Marcus spread out a hand-drawn map of Albuquerque, marking addresses with red ink. They're not random targets. Look at the pattern. Every house is in a neighborhood that's been marked for redevelopment. Emily traced the red dots with her finger, seeing her father's mechanic shop among the marked locations. They're stealing people's homes to sell to developers. Not stealing. Jonah corrected grimly. Coercing, making it legal by forcing people to sign under duress. Rick sat at the far end of the table, his face haggard but his attention focused. There were others at the meetings, other men like me, paying for protection they didn't need, signing papers they didn't understand. He looked directly at Emily. Your mother never knew. I told her the extra job was to save for your college. Emily felt a complex mix of anger and sympathy for her stepfather. We need to find the other families. Way ahead of you? Mija. Toby held up his phone, showing a social media post he'd created. Community art project about neighborhood stories. People love sharing family history, especially when they think someone's listening. Within an hour, his post had generated 12 responses from people in the targeted neighborhoods. Stories about mysterious debts, pressure to sell, families who'd disappeared suddenly after living somewhere for decades. Mrs. Gutierrez responded. Emily read over Toby's shoulder. She says she never understood why her husband's old army buddy needed money every month, but the man who collected it said her husband had borrowed money for her son's medical bills. Her husband died 8 years ago, Alicia noted, checking her records. Their son was treated for leukemia at University Hospital, all covered by insurance and veterans benefits. Marcus's phone buzzed with a call from Mrs. Hernandez. Mijo, you need to know something. My grandson at City Hall says someone's been asking about you specifically, about your record, your associates. When you moved to the neighborhood, what kind of someone? The kind that carries badges but doesn't work for any department my grandson recognizes. Emily felt her stomach drop. They're investigating you because of me. They're investigating me because I'm exactly who they're afraid of, Marcus corrected. Someone who knows how their operation works because I've seen it from the inside. Alicia looked up from her laptop. Marcus, what exactly were you involved in before? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers unconsciously going to the space where the 47A button usually rested. Security consulting. Protection services for people who couldn't go to the police. You were enforcers, Emily said, understanding flooding her voice. We were young men who thought we understood how the world worked. Your father was different, though. He saw what we were becoming and got out early, started the mechanic shop, made us promise that if we ever got clean, we'd help protect the people who couldn't protect themselves. Jonah nodded slowly. That's why he chose 47A as our identifier, not because of where we lived, but because of what we wanted to become. Article 47A of the state constitution, the right of every person to be secure in their home and property. Emily felt something settle into place, like the final piece of a puzzle she'd been unconsciously assembling for years. So you all went legitimate, but you kept the promise. Your father kept us honest, Toby added. Every time one of us was tempted to go back to the old ways, we'd remember Diego and what he'd say about choosing construction over destruction. As if summoned by their conversation, Emily's mother's car pulled into the driveway, through the window. They could see her sitting behind the wheel, talking animatedly on her phone. She's going to be scared, Emily realized. She's going to want to pay them whatever they ask, rather than risk losing everything. Then we need to make sure she understands what she'd really be losing, Alicia said, gathering the documents into organized stacks. Not just the house, but her daughter's inheritance and her own self-respect. Emily's mother entered through the back door, stopping short when she saw the tableau in her kitchen, her daughter surrounded by 4 adults who clearly belonged to a world she'd hoped was dead and buried. Emily, baby, are you okay? She moved immediately to her daughter, checking for signs of harm. Rick called and said there were complications with some legal papers. Mom, Emily said gently, these are Dad's friends, the ones from his letter. Her mother's face went very still. What letter? Emily handed her father's letter to the woman who'd loved him, watched her read it twice, saw understanding and fury dawn in her eyes simultaneously. How long? She asked Rick, her voice deadly quiet. 5 years since 6 months after we got married. Rick's voice was barely audible. They said it was real, that Diego had borrowed money for Emily's medical bills when she was little, that the debt transferred to family. Emily was never seriously sick. Her father paid cash for every doctor's visit, every prescription. Her mother's hand shook as she set the letter down. You've been paying fake debt with money we needed for real life. Outside, rain began to fall again, but this time it felt like cleansing rather than chaos. Emily looked around the table at the people who'd honored her father's memory by keeping their promise, and felt something she hadn't experienced since the night before, the certainty that she wasn't facing this alone. What do we do now? She asked. Marcus smiled, and for the first time, Emily saw the dangerous young man he'd once been shining through the coffee shop owner he'd become. "Now we go to war," he said. The legal kind. Chapter 8. The Albuquerque City Council chambers filled slowly on Thursday evening, an unusual crowd for what was typically a sparsely attended monthly meeting. Emily sat in the front row between her mother and Alicia, her father's letter folded carefully in her jacket pocket next to the 47A button that had started everything. Marcus had spent the afternoon making calls to local journalists, community organizers, and the kind of lawyers who took cases for justice rather than profit. Word had spread through social media, neighborhood networks, and the informal communication systems that connected working families across the city. 17 families, Emily whispered, counting the people who'd come forward since Tuesday. And those are just the ones brave enough to show up. Mrs. Gutierrez sat 3 rows back with her teenage son, clutching a folder of documents that proved her husband had never borrowed the money she'd been paying back for 3 years. Next to her was an elderly man who'd been told his deceased brother's gambling debts needed to be settled before the family home could be transferred to his grandchildren. The key, Alicia had explained during their preparation, is to let the evidence speak for itself. No accusations, no conspiracy theories, just facts, documents, and people telling their own stories. Rick sat near the back of the room, his face gray, but his posture determined. He'd spent Wednesday afternoon at the district attorney's office, providing detailed records of every payment he'd made and every conversation he'd had with Miss Rodriguez and her associates. The hardest part, he'd told Emily that morning, isn't admitting I was fooled, it's admitting I let fear make me complicit. At 7:15 p.m., the council president called for public comments. Emily was the first to approach the microphone, her mother's encouraging hand on her shoulder as she stood. "My name is Emily Vasquez," she began, her voice clear despite the tremor in her hands. 6 years ago, my father died in a car accident 3 weeks ago. I found out that someone has been collecting money in his name, claiming he owed debts that never existed. She unfolded her father's letter, reading the key passages aloud. "My father wrote this before he died, because he knew that people like him, working families, immigrants, people without fancy lawyers, are easy targets for scams that look legal but aren't." The room was completely silent, except for the soft scratch of reporters' pens and the hum of camera equipment from the local news crew that had responded to Marcus's invitation. But my father also knew something else. He knew that people who care about justice don't forget their promises, even when keeping those promises is dangerous. Emily gestured to Marcus, Alicia, Jonah, and Toby, who sat together in the second row. These people honored my father's memory by honoring their word. They came when I needed help, and they helped me understand that this isn't just about one family or one house. This is about people who think working families are easy targets. She placed copies of the fraudulent debt documents on the podium. These papers claim my father borrowed money he never borrowed, from an organization called Southwestern Property Solutions, the same organization that has targeted at least 17 other families in this room tonight. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as people recognized the name and began making connections. Mrs. Gutierrez was next at the microphone, her son translating when her English faltered. Her story was similar but more heartbreaking, a widow with limited English being pressured to sign documents she couldn't fully understand, paying money she couldn't afford for debts her husband never incurred. The elderly man, Mr. Torres, spoke about monthly payments that had consumed his Social Security check, leaving him choosing between medication and groceries, while honoring what he'd been told was his brother's final obligation. By 8:30, 12 families had shared their stories. The pattern was undeniable, targeting vulnerable families, claiming inherited debts that couldn't be verified, applying pressure through threats of legal action and foreclosure. Council President Martinez called a brief recess, during which Emily noticed several people in expensive suits talking urgently on phones in the hallway. She recognized Mrs. Rodriguez among them, though the woman was careful not to make eye contact. "They're scared," Marcus observed quietly. "Fraud investigations are federal crimes. Prison time, not just fines." When the meeting resumed, District Attorney Patricia Vega addressed the chamber. "Based on the testimony provided tonight and evidence submitted to our office, we are opening a criminal investigation into predatory lending and property fraud schemes, targeting bereaved families in multiple Albuquerque neighborhoods." She looked directly at Emily. "This young woman's courage in coming forward has exposed a pattern of criminal behavior that may have affected dozens of families over several years." Emily felt her mother squeeze her hand as De Vega continued. We encourage any other families who may have been targeted to come forward. Our office is establishing a victim assistance fund to help families recover money paid under fraudulent claims." The chamber erupted in applause. But Emily barely heard it. Through the window, she could see Mrs. Rodriguez and her associates getting into their cars, clearly understanding that their carefully constructed operation had just collapsed under the weight of community solidarity. "What happens now?" Emily asked Marcus as they gathered their papers. "Now we rebuild," he replied. "Your neighborhood, your trust, your life, all the things they tried to take away," as they filed out of the council chambers. Emily noticed something that made her smile. Despite the emotional exhaustion, Mrs. Hernandez was deep in conversation with Mrs. Gutierrez, sharing phone numbers and making plans to check on each other's families. Mr. Torres was accepting a ride home from the son of another affected family. The predators had tried to isolate their victims, but their exposure had done the opposite. It had created a community of people who understood that protecting each other was the only way to protect themselves. Emily's pocket felt lighter as they walked to the parking lot, as if her father's letter and the 47A button were finally at rest. Chapter 9, Friday morning brought local news crews to Emily's street. Their vans parked carefully to avoid disrupting the normal rhythm of the neighborhood. Emily watched from her bedroom window as reporters interviewed Mrs. Hernandez, who was clearly enjoying her moment as the neighborhood watch coordinator who'd helped expose the fraud scheme. "Channel 7 wants to interview you," her mother called from downstairs. "And Channel 4, and that reporter from the Journal." Emily came down to find her kitchen once again serving as headquarters, but this time for a different kind of operation. Alicia had her laptop open to a spreadsheet tracking the families who'd come forward, while Marcus was on the phone with a federal prosecutor who'd driven down from Santa Fe. 43 families so far, Toby reported, looking up from his own phone. The story's been shared over 2,000 times on social media. People are calling from Las Cruces, Roswell, even Colorado Springs. The scope of the operation was becoming clear. Southwestern Property Solutions and its network of shell companies had been running variations of the same scam across the Southwest, targeting families in gentrifying neighborhoods where property values were rising faster than working families could benefit. The feds are calling it wire fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy, Marcus explained as he ended his call. When you use fake documents and cross state lines to steal from multiple families, it becomes a federal case. Emily's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, but this time the message was different. "Thank you for speaking up. My family was targeted too. You gave us courage to fight back. Maria S." Throughout the morning, similar messages arrived. Families thanking Emily for her courage, sharing their own stories, offering support. The isolation that had made them vulnerable was being replaced by connection that made them strong. "The reporter wants to know about your father," Emily's mother said gently. About the letter and the promise. Emily considered this carefully. Her father's story was hers to tell, but it was also Marcus's, Alicia's, Jonah's, and Toby's. It belonged to anyone who'd ever needed to choose between their past and their future. "I'll talk to them," she decided, "but I want to do it here, with everyone." The interview took place in the living room where just days before Miss Rodriguez had tried to intimidate Emily into silence. Now it was filled with natural light and the voices of people who'd found strength in shared truth. "What made you trust these adults?" the reporter asked Emily. "They were strangers to you." Emily looked at Marcus, thinking about the moment when he'd offered hot chocolate to a scared girl hiding under a table. They weren't strangers. They were my father's family. And family doesn't abandon family, even when it's dangerous. "What do you want people to understand about what happened here?" Emily thought about Mrs. Gutierrez crying over monthly payments that had stolen her son's college fund, about Mr. Torres choosing between medicine and food, about her own stepfather drowning in fear for 5 years. I want them to understand that people who hurt families count on those families being too scared or too ashamed to ask for help. They count on us feeling alone. She looked around the room at faces that had become familiar over the past week. But we're not alone. We never have to be alone. The reporter turned to Marcus. "What made you drop everything to help Emily?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his fingers automatically going to his shirt pocket where the 47A button rested. "Her father saved my life once, literally pulled me out of a burning car. But more than that, he saved my future by helping me understand the difference between using strength to hurt people and using strength to protect them. Do you see this as redemption for your past?" "I see it as continuation," Marcus replied. Diego taught us that the past doesn't have to define the future, but it can inform it. We can use what we learned in dark places to bring light to others. Alicia spoke about systemic vulnerability, about how predatory schemes target communities where people have learned not to trust official systems. Jonah talked about the importance of neighbors watching out for neighbors. Toby described how art and storytelling could break through isolation. "What's next for all of you?" was the reporter's final question. Emily felt the weight of possibility in the question. "We're starting a neighborhood watch program, but not just for crime, for scams, for people trying to take advantage of families who don't know their rights. And we're going to keep the promise," Marcus added. "All of us, together, because that's what families do," as the news crew packed up their equipment. Emily walked to her father's photo on the mantelpiece. The picture showed him in his mechanic's coveralls, grease stains on his hands and laugh lines around his eyes. "I think we did it, Dad," she whispered. "I think we kept your promise." Behind her, she could hear the others making plans. Alicia coordinating with social services to identify other vulnerable families. Jonah organizing a community meeting for the following weekend. Toby designing flyers to educate people about predatory lending schemes. The house that had felt like a trap just a week ago now felt like a headquarters for something larger and more important than any of them had imagined. Emily's mother appeared beside her, studying the photograph. "He would be so proud of you, Misha, and so grateful to his friends." They're not just his friends anymore, Emily realized. They're ours. Through the window, she could see Mrs. Hernandez teaching a group of neighbors how to identify fraudulent documents, while Mr. Torres was helping a young mother understand her rights as a homeowner. The predators had tried to turn neighbors against each other through fear and isolation. Instead, they'd accidentally created the strongest community Emily had ever been part of. Chapter 10. 3 weeks later, Emily's neighborhood buzzed with the controlled chaos of a community celebration that had grown far beyond anyone's original plans. What had started as a simple block party to thank the volunteers who'd helped with the fraud investigation had evolved into a festival that drew families from across Albuquerque. The morning air carried the scents of green chile, fresh tortillas, and Marcus's surprisingly excellent coffee, served from a cart he'd stationed at the corner where Central Avenue met Emily's street. Toby's art students had painted a mural on the side of the community center, depicting hands reaching toward each other across a map of the neighborhood. Emily stood on her front porch, watching Jonah teach a group of teenagers how to build a community garden box, while Alicia ran a booth helping families understand their legal rights. It had been 18 days since the federal arrests, 12 days since the first restitution checks had been distributed, and exactly 1 week since Emily had moved in with Aunt Maria in Las Cruces. The decision hadn't been easy, but it had been right. Emily's mother needed time to rebuild her life without the constant reminder of Rick's well-meaning deception, and Emily needed space to process everything that had changed. More importantly, Aunt Maria had been asking Emily to come live with her for years, and Emily was finally ready to say yes to a future that felt like choice rather than necessity. "You're going to visit every weekend," her mother had insisted, and Emily had agreed. The house would always be hers, legally and emotionally, but home had become something larger than any single building. "Ready for your surprise?" Marcus appeared at her elbow. Carrying a small wrapped package, Emily opened it carefully to find the 47A button, now restored and mounted in a simple silver frame with an engraving, "For Emily Vasquez, Keeper of Promises, October 2024. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her finger over the polished metal. "Your father would want you to have it," Marcus said. "But more than that, he'd want you to understand what it represents. Not just the promise we made to him, but the promise you made to yourself, and to everyone who needed someone to speak up." Across the street, Emily could see Mrs. Gutierrez setting up a table of traditional Mexican pastries next to Mr. Torres, who was demonstrating how to identify fraudulent documents to a small crowd of interested neighbors. The victims had become advocates, their shared experience transforming into community strength. "Any regrets?" Alicia asked, joining them on the porch. Emily considered the question seriously. A month ago, her biggest concern had been a history test she wasn't prepared for. Now she was part of a federal investigation, had testified before the city council, and had been interviewed by reporters from 3 states. "No regrets," she said finally. "Just questions about what comes next." "What comes next?" Toby called from the sidewalk where he was helping children create chalk art. "Is whatever we decide comes next. That's the point of having choices." Emily's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Channel 4 wants to do a follow-up story next month. Interested, she typed back. Only if they focus on the families who got their money back, not just on me. As the afternoon wore on, the celebration took on the comfortable rhythm of a community that had learned to trust itself. Children played games while adults shared stories and contact information. Teenagers who'd been isolated in their own struggles found each other and began making plans for a peer support group. 47 families got their money back, Jonah reported to Emily as the sun began to set behind the Sandia Mountains. Average restitution was $12,000. Some families got enough back to pay off real debts. Send kids to college, fix roofs that had been leaking for years. Emily watched Mrs. Hernandez dancing with her grandson to music from someone's portable speaker and felt the weight of responsibility and possibility settling into her bones. Will you keep in touch? She asked Marcus as the crowd began to thin out. Mija, you couldn't get rid of us if you tried. We're family now. All of us. He gestured to the neighbors cleaning up together, the teenagers exchanging phone numbers, the elderly residents who'd found new purpose in protecting their community. Your father's promise didn't end with helping you. It expanded to helping everyone. As Emily packed her things for the drive to Las Cruces, she found herself thinking about promises. The ones her father had made. The ones Marcus and his friends had kept. The ones she was making to herself about the kind of person she wanted to become. The 47 button caught the last rays of sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. And Emily understood finally that some inheritances were more valuable than property or money. Some legacies were measured not in what you received, but in what you chose to give. Her phone buzzed with one final text of the day. This one from a number she didn't recognize. My family just got our house back because of your story. Thank you for showing us that we didn't have to face this alone. The Ramirez family, Phoenix. Emily smiled as she slipped the framed button into her jacket pocket, right next to her father's letter. Tomorrow she would start her new school, make new friends, and begin building a life that honored both her past and her possibilities. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by people who understood that the strongest promises are the ones we make to protect each other. Have you ever had to find the courage to speak up when adults around you were making decisions that felt wrong? Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust our instincts and ask for help from the right people. What would you do if you discovered that someone was taking advantage of your family? Remember, there are always people willing to help when we're brave enough to reach out. Would you like another story?